From Masters, Esther, and insecurity, from that international report, let's switch gears completely now and talk all things wine. You did hear James putting it to the preacher there that indeed Jesus did turn water into wine in a wedding, and we want to learn more about that because quite a number of people, especially here in Kenya, perhaps don't know the etiquette, what wine goes with what, and all about wine. And joining me in studio today is Lisa Gorge. She is Sankara's master sommelier, or if you like, wine expert, and she'll help us through our conversation this morning. Good morning.
Morning. How are you?
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So wine, there's lots of classifications. Perhaps let's start there. We have red, there's white, there's sparkling, there's dry, there's sweet. Take us through some of the classifications of wine that are important.
Well, to start with, you've got, as you say, your three basic. You've got still wine, sparkling wine, and then dessert wine. And dessert wine just tends to be either fortified, in which case they add a little bit of a spirit, or it's just a little bit more of a sweeter style, in which case, you've got that very rich syrupy character. Sparkling wines, you can have a lot of different styles of sparkling wines. So you've got, obviously your classic is champagne.
Yeah.
There are other ways that you can make it where you add some, add the carbon dioxide into the wine.
Yeah.
But most places around the world make a champagne style. They just can't call it champagne. And then finally, of course, you've got still wines, and that's your white wine and your red wine. And they can range from fairly dry to sort of sweet or semi-sweet as well.
And what is the main difference? When you're talking about dry, sweet is definitely sweet.
Yeah.
Dry is not sweet.
It's not sweet, no. But you can, there are, there are various, there's just so much scope.
Okay.
So, you can have a very, very dry wine. You can have a dry wine, but it's got a more fruity character, so it doesn't feel as dry.
Yeah.
In red wines, you've got tannins, and the tannins are the sort of dryingness that you get when you sort of swallow.
Okay.
And that's a different kind of dryness. So there's a whole lot of variations of where you go from sweet, from fruity, from dry.
Okay. And just a reminder of viewers, at the beginning of the show we talked about Sankara giving away 2 vouchers for dinner at the Sankara Hotel on the 9th and the 10th of May. And the simple question we're asking you to be the lucky winner, potentially, who is George Dalachia? That is the question we're asking. We'll give you the answer and tell you who the winner is at the end. So you'll have a voucher for 2 for dinner at the Sankara Hotel. I'll read you all the details later on the show. So keep the tweets coming. The messages are 22155 as well, and we will announce the winner towards the end of the show. So we definitely don't have wine, morning TV, but we have water.
Yes.
What are the basics would you take us through? Because I don't know, with your experience working at the Sankara, do you find that many Kenyans have an understanding of wine? Because it's a lot to cover in terms of what to take it with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a lot to cover, and there's just, as I said, there's so much variation. There's not really a right and wrong. You can say that yes, red meat and red wine go better together, but there's so much variation that you can play around with different flavors. So it's really about finding something that you like, something that you enjoy, and just trying new flavors and that sort of thing. So my job at Sankara is if people are interested, then they can say, well, I'm having the lamb shank for dinner. What wine would you recommend to pair with it? And then I can guide them through a few options of different flavor spectrums from the wine perspective, and what would pair well with the lamb shank.
All right.
And so that's my job is
But basics, red wine goes best with what kind of food?
Generally red wine with red meat.
Okay.
White wine with fish, with seafood, with chicken, and then obviously you've got dessert wines with dessert.
With dessert.
Sparkling wines also go really well with dessert, though, so it's definitely something to keep in mind.
We have several things on the table. Let's begin with the glasses, because that's a big thing.
Yes.
Sometimes you'll get a drinking water glass in some places to have wine with. But take us through these 2 glasses.
Yeah.
What does that one? You can hold it up. And
so we've got the 2 glasses. The smaller glass is the white wine glass.
Yeah.
It's just a little smaller, and we would usually fill it to about that far.
So you shouldn't go fill up my glass.
Don't fill up the glass. You want to have enough space to swirl. So I'll just pour a little bit in here for you.
Yes, and that's the other thing you see, that in hotels you go and they'll serve you and they'll wait for you to check if it's good. Most people don't know what that is all about. In the movies you'll see people swallowing it, sort of sniffing it, tasting, and making some interesting movement with their mouth. And,
So if you do a little bit of a swirl like that.
Why
and
is
what
that?
that does is that gets oxygen into the wine, and the oxygen releases all the aromas. So you get more of the bouquet of the wine. So you can tell, once you know a little bit more about it, you can tell. Okay, it's got it's got lemony characteristics, a little bit of tropical. Maybe it's a Sauvignon Blanc, and so that's why we do the swirling. And then the sniffing, so you can get that lovely aroma flavor as well.
Okay.
So with white wine, as I say, don't try not fill it up too much, because you need a little bit of space to allow yourself to do a nice swirl.
And also the other thing is how to hold the glass, because you find some people will grab it like that.
Yeah.
There are those who hold it right at the bottom, and there are those who hold it like that. So how do you hold it?
I generally hold it by the stem. The reason you do is, especially with white wine, is if you're holding it like this, you're heating up the wine.
Okay.
And especially with white wine, you want to keep it nice and crisp and cool.
Right.
So that's why you generally would hold it by the stem.
All right. And take it sip by sip.
And sip by sip, yeah. With red wine, sometimes you'll see people that do hold it by the bowl, and that is to actually warm up the red wine a little bit, because...
Okay. So that's for white wine?
For white wine,
the smaller glass. The bigger one?
So then the bigger wine, the bigger glass you've got is for red wine. And with red wine, there's a little bit more of a complexity in the nose and in the bouquet as well. So for red wine, we want a little bit more space to give it a little bit more oxygen. Oxygen also helps to soften the tannins of the wine, which is why you'll find people sometimes decant a red wine.
Yeah.
And that just lets it be a little bit more soft and a little bit more gentle on the palate.
And decanting is putting out from the bottle to a cant to let it
into so you get a nice bit of oxygen.
Okay. Again, no filling it up.
No filling it up. You've seen maybe a quarter of the way, and it gives you a lot of room to swirl it around, and that'll get, as I say, as much oxygen as possible into the wine, smooths out the tannins, opens up the aromas as well, so you can pick up all the various complexities that you'll get from the grape or the wine itself.
All right, and we have other stuff over here.
So we just brought some cheeses along, and the nice thing about cheeses is that and wine is that they work so well together. It's a really fantastic pairing.
Okay.
And this, again, so much variation with cheeses, so much variation with wine. So you compare a lot of things like the Gouda. It's quite it's a bit of a sharper cheese, would work really well with a red wine, whereas something a little bit softer like a brie you could even pair with a white wine. And then of course if you've got a beautiful creamy blue cheese, it works beautifully with sweet wine, because the sweetness and the sort of smelly blue cheese just is a perfect match as well.
And over here,
and we've got some lovely bread just for the cheeses as well.
I'm gonna eat as we go along. So many people, when you sit down for a meal, you'll have people order a bottle and go through it as they eat.
Yes.
How much is too much when you're talking about wine? Should you go through a bottle when you're having a meal, for example? How many glasses?
I think that's very much a personal sort of taste. It depends on how much you normally enjoy. How much food you're having as well. So I think it's a very much
personal choice. But does it help with digestion? Because some people will say, "Oh yeah, have your food with wine because it'll help with digestion."
I'm not sure that it helps with digestion, but it definitely helps enhance the flavors of the food. There's an amazing sort of balance between finding the right wine with the right food, and they enhance each other's flavors, and that's a reason for doing the pairing.
The pairing, and the talk about the longer the wine is, the older the wine is, the better it is. Is that correct for all wines across the board?
No.
Okay, take us.
Again, so much variation. A lot of French wines, especially the more expensive styles, are made to age 20 years before they're even really drinkable. I mean, if you have a very young Bordeaux, it's got very, very strong bitter tannins, and it's actually not very pleasant to drink. But after 20 years, it's mellowed, it's aged, it develops a lot of what we call tertiary flavors, and then it becomes so much more complex and enjoyable. Some wines, especially from the New World regions like South Africa, like Australia, Chile, they're made to be drunk more younger. And so, so if you've got 5-year-old wine, then it's ready to be drunk then. It does depend a lot on how the wine is made. The winemaker will go and say, okay, I want this to develop over 20 years, or I want to develop over 2 years, and then it's ready to be drunk. So
Okay. What do you advise somebody who's shopping for wine for dinner vis-a-vis one who's shopping for wine for a party where people just drink?
Yeah. Definitely, if you're buying wine for dinner, think about the food that you're going to be having.
Yeah.
You can always go online and just look up ideas for food pairing, for food and wine pairing as well, and just see, okay, this is what we're going to be having for dinner. What would work nicely with that, and try and find something that will balance each other out. Because if you're having a very, very rich, red meat stew, and you've got a very light, delicate white wine, then the one's going to overpower the other, and then you're not going to enjoy the wine as much.
Okay.
So,
what about you? How did you get to know all this stuff about wine?
I was working in a restaurant while I was studying as a waiter, and I just fell in love with it. I just love the complexity of it. There's just so much variation. So I started my studies at the Cape Wine Academy, and finished my diploma last year.
Yeah.
So now I've got a diploma, and
what is it they take you through in wine school?
Pretty much everything.
Okay.
Yeah, we learn all the basics about growing wine, working in the vineyards. We also learn about the wine making process, and all the ways that different wine is made. We learn obviously about the flavors and characteristics of all the different wines. And then of course you go through all the regions of the world and where wine is grown, and what grapes come from there, what wine comes from there, and that sort of thing as well.
Which is your favorite? Putting you on the spot.
Very tough one, because it's like asking which is your favorite children.
Yeah.
But I would have to say Pinot Noir is one of my favorite grapes.
Yeah.
They call it the heartbreak grape, because it's very, very difficult to grow and very difficult to make a really good wine from. So it's one of those, really tricky ones. So when you get it right, it's absolutely amazing. It's
all
really,
right.
really
In your
good.
line of work, what is one of the most frequently asked questions? The things and concerns people will have when they want to, order for wine. What would they ask?
Here in Kenya, I found a lot of people tend towards a sweeter palate. So they're looking for a sweeter wine. And that's, it's quite difficult, because a lot of wine is made dry. So it's, it's just about finding a nice balance between, a good dry wine, but that has a characteristic of sweetness to it, or fruitiness to it. So that's one of the tricky ones here.
The tricky ones.
Yeah.
And the biggest mistake across doing this that you find generally people would make in choosing wines, or misconception, if not mistake, is on wine?
Again, I would have to say the sort of sweetness factor. So, sort of sweeter styles are not necessarily... they don't necessarily pair well with food. So then it's, it's about kind of finding a nice balance between something that you enjoy and something that'll also pair well with your food.
With the food.
Yeah.
So you do that at Sankara, the wine and food pairing.
Food pairing, yes.
So is it something you do over and over?
So we do a wine and dine evening every month at the beginning of the month, when we get in different either winemakers or wine regions. So last month, for example, we did a Spanish wine pairing. So we do that once a month, which is pretty good.
Which is pretty good.
Yep.
The other thing somebody was saying, was wondering, for Kenyans, when you're going to the supermarket, there are all manner of wines, and sometimes there would be those that would be poisonous to take. They don't have the date on them, but that if you take, they'll actually give you stomach trouble or whatever. So how would you be able to tell?
I would, with supermarket wines, I would try and stick with a fairly young wine. So, we're in 2014 now, so anything from 2010 onwards as a vintage, because generally supermarket wines are made to be drunk younger. So if you've got a really old wine there, it's probably been sitting in the store for a long time. It might be the heat might have compromised the flavors. So I think definitely try find a young wine, and in this case I would say also stick with screw caps. It just keeps the wine a little bit fresher. And so, if you've got, again, supermarket wines, generally screw caps are a better way to go.
A better way to go.
Yeah.
Calories. What wines, red and white, compares in as far as calories go? Which ones would have more? if you have that in mind and you're concerned?
I would say generally your drier wines, obviously they have less sugar and therefore they're going to have slightly less calories. But I don't think that there's much of a difference. I think across the board, they're not too high in calories. I think probably less than beer, for example.
Yeah.
But more than, say, a white spirit.
Yeah. Do people have an appreciation of wine, or do you still find that a majority will just, red, sweet, whatever, dry?
I think a lot of people are learning to appreciate it much more.
Yeah?
Yeah. There's definitely more of a willingness to learn and openness to try new flavors, try new things, and figure out what you like.
Yeah. So when you said that you can have wine with cheese, are you saying that sit down with a glass of wine and some cheese and have that together?
Yes.
And that
that
would be best for what? Afternoon?
Oh, yes.
Chilled out?
Afternoon, lunchtime, after dinner. Instead of desserts, you could always have a cheese board with some wine as well.
Yeah.
Picnics,
And there are those that are chilled and they're best served that way. There's some that you should not. So how do you determine which is which?
White wines generally should be served chilled, that's about 6 to 8 degrees Celsius. Red wines, they say serve at room temperature, but I think when they mean room temperature, they mean European room temperature rather than Kenyan room temperature.
Yeah.
So red wines generally between 18 and 20 degrees. Which is cool enough to keep the alcohol flavor down, but warm enough to allow the aromas and the bouquet to come through as well.
All right. I've watched some of the wine making process in a movie. I don't know if it was actually real, but it involved crushing of berries, the feet.
With the
and I was
feet,
thinking, that's very unhygienic. Is that what I get to drink? So how do you get that?
I think that very rarely happens, mostly in certain very small old-fashioned style vineyards.
Okay.
Most of it's done now by machines. That it's a sort of an inflatable bag within the container, and the bag inflates and slowly crushes the grapes, and the juice will run out there.
Yeah.
So generally very hygienic. If you don't keep your cellar very hygienic, then it will affect the flavors of the wine. So I think in this day and age, definitely everyone tries very hard to keep it as clean as possible.
To keep it as clean as possible. Yeah, because I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I'm taking wine from some somebody with some dirty feet. But also, what I find very interesting with wine, men would prefer, what would you think, red or white? And for women, preferences? Or is it balanced out?
I think it's balanced out.
Yeah?
I mean, I think sometimes, I suppose, women might.
But most women are
prefer red. White? I don't know.
Maybe around my circles, there are people. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would say it's pretty balanced. I think, people are starting to just, enjoy.
So there is no gender, red should be associated with either gender.
Not, no.
Definitely not. Okay, I was to bring this to a close. What do you tell, especially because I find most places, other than high-end hotels like yourselves, will know and have experts like yourselves with wine. In Kenya, is there those kind of resources to be able to still educate and inform people to learn more about wine, so that when they're serving their customers, they're able to better advise?
Yes.
Yeah.
As far as I know, there is somebody who's doing a Cape Wine Academy courses in Nairobi.
Yes.
But other than that, I don't think that there is anything as yet. But hopefully, at some point that there.
Where is it that you studied?
At the Cape in Cape Town, South Africa. Yeah.
You plan to continue to do this?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah?
Definitely,
okay. Yeah. Other ways to be able to combine wine, other than the normal food and desserts, the sparkling especially that you mentioned, how different is that? What additives, what is it that makes it different from the still?
Sparkling wine, it goes through a second fermentation. And what happens is when you get yeast and the sugar, that combines and it creates alcohol and carbon dioxide. And so in a normal wine, in a still white wine, for example, the carbon dioxide will go off into the into the air. But what they'll do is with this, they'll make the wine, put it into a bottle, and then put a little bit more sugar and yeast into the bottle and seal it up.
Yeah.
And that creates that second fermentation, which creates the carbon dioxide, but that stays in the bottle. And so that's where you get the sparkling wine from.
Okay.
That's where the bubbles come from.
All right.
All
right. We have Lindsay asking, when somebody, are there some illnesses that one should not take wine with? Are there some diseases, I guess? Yeah.
I would have to say it depends on what your doctor recommends.
Yeah.
Obviously, you shouldn't drink when you're pregnant, and I know that there are certain things like certain antibiotics that you shouldn't have alcohol with, but that would have to be up to your doctor, I think.
Okay. And then you have here George is saying, kindly take me through. I missed the part. I see you have glasses on the table. On which one is for white wine, which one is for red? Very briefly.
So as I say, the smaller glasses for white wine, larger glasses for red wine. And yeah, so that's just a little bit more concentrated flavors.
George,
a little bit more open flavors.
More open flavors. And that is about giving the wine time
to breathe. Oxygen.
Why is it breathing?
So it's getting oxygen, so it's breathing in oxygen. One of those funny wine terms, I suppose.
It's one of those funny wine terms. And then we have here Lisa is talking about, I want to give a birthday present to a friend of mine on her 40th birthday. What wine would you recommend?
I would say either go with something that's really nice, like a sparkling champagne, or go with a really good red wine that can age a little bit, and that's just you can keep for a few more years and then open as a sort of as a special evening. So nice red wine that's got a bit of aging potential.
Why red wine with some aging potential?
So it's a special wine.
It's
so you
special.
can you can keep it for a few years and then open it and remember your friend, remember your 40th birthday.
Okay. And you find that some are very, very expensive, some wines. What goes into determining how the cost of wine?
Pretty much the winemaker. The winemaker would determine the cost of the wine. Things like bottles. Some bottles are light and quite cheap, and some bottles are very heavy, more expensive. Sometimes if the wine goes into French oak barrels for 2 years, then it's spent 2 years just sitting around waiting. So that also creates an added expense, whereas some red wines maybe spend 6 months in barrel and then go straight to the market.
Yeah.
So there's a timing thing as well, and also your facilities, how much you need to pay to keep upkeep. So I think the winemaker, the wine seller will determine the price.
So it's what has gone into making that wine, the bottle and all the things.
The bottle and all the things.
Okay. Yeah, because you can't find 40,000 and like, okay, this must have some Holy Spirit in here. And then there's the covering of the bottle. You'll find some will have just the normal leads that you have with the bottles, and then you'll have the cork that you have to use. Why is that difference?
Cork, they usually use cork that allows a small amount of air to come into the bottle, and so that's good for aging purposes. So if you've got a wine that you want to age, then it allows the wine to age by letting a little bit of oxygen in at a time. Whereas the screw cap doesn't allow any oxygen in, so the wine won't really age. It keeps its freshness about it.
All right.
So,
but if that is to avoid any air from coming in, because you cannot put it back. For some you can, for some you cannot. Then the air will keep going in. Does that mean you have to finish the bottle of wine?
Yes. It does. If once it's exposed to a lot of oxygen after a few days, 3 or 4 days, it starts to lose its proper flavors, and then it doesn't taste as well.
Okay, let's go back to the questions. We have James saying, I think red wine is girly and men should stick to white wine. What does the expert have to say?
That's funny. I would say
I think it's
definitely I don't think red wine is girly at all. I think if anything, it's actually the other way around, because red wine has a lot more structure and a lot more boldness. But no, I would definitely say that I think it doesn't matter what your gender is, you should just try to enjoy wine.
We have Brian talking about, should one in a night out drink wine, or is it advisable to have other alcohol brands and instead stick with dinner for wine?
that is completely, again, a personal thing.
Okay, so not. I guess it's coming from a place of too much. When you have too much wine, is it bad, or should it be always
I think
one
too
or
much
two?
of any alcohol is bad. You know,
Yeah.
if you're going to finish a bottle of whiskey, it's probably not very good
It's not
either.
a good
So,
idea.
so I definitely think, you know, I think if you're going out, then a few glasses of wine or a few whiskeys.
Yeah.
It's a personal preference, I think.
Do you have ever scenarios where people blend or you can mix wines? I know that's a very weird question. Red and white.
You mean to have both at the same night?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think
No
that's
problem.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because some will say that hangovers or this and this will happen.
No, I mean, obviously, you know, if you have too much, then it will happen.
Yeah.
But
there's no problem mixing.
no, they say that you shouldn't mix alcohols, and I think that if you're sticking with grape derived, then white wine and red wine is the same thing.
Okay. All right, we want to bring this to a close. I want to take our viewers through the details of what the winner will get, but finally your closing remarks to whoever is watching, whether they're a hotel, people, you know, running an organization, or somebody who'd want to get a good bottle. What would be your 2 key points of advice?
I would say that, you know, you definitely would look for something that is good value for money, but that is also a little bit more expensive. If you're looking for a really good bottle of wine, unfortunately, it is just that the higher the costs, probably the better it is.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to say that it's true, but most of the time it will be. So that's the one option. And the other thing is to say that that if you find something that it's not too old yet, unless you want to drink it right now. So try and find something that's only maybe a few years old. You can still keep it for a few more years.
You can still keep it. There you have it. I always find that and use that as the criteria for most things. The more expensive it is, most likely the better.
Probably.
As well. This is Lisa Gorge. If you missed it, she's a wine expert at the Sankara Hotel. We'll have this clip on our website later on. And of course, we're giving away, Sankara Hotel is giving away 2 vouchers for dinner on the 9th or the 10th of May this year. And that is a question we're asking for you to have an opportunity to win those 2 vouchers. Who is George Dalachia? Who is George Dalachia? And we will definitely get you those tickets. One lucky winner will get that. You'll be hosted at the Sankara Nairobi for wine pairing dinner for 2 at the Artisan Restaurant with compliments, of course, from Sankara. And they believe passionately so in offering you a personal and memorable experience. So 9th and 10th of May is when you will be having that dinner, but today we will announce who the winner will be. So definitely stay with us. After Bangla Kiosk, we'll be announcing who gets to take away those 2 tickets.